People always say a Ouija board is harmless, just a game. A flat piece of wood with letters and numbers, nothing more. But what most don't realize is that it doesn't need you to believe in it. Tonight, you'll hear 3 encounters that prove some doors don't close once they're opened, and sometimes, what comes through doesn't leave when the game ends. It started as one of those nights that felt more like a dare than a ritual. 7 friends, a dimly lit living room, and a Ouija board spread out on the floor like an invitation. None of them believed in it. Not really. It was just something to pass the time, another story they could laugh about later. The candles flickered in the center of the room. The air grew still. At first, the board barely moved. Simple words, weak motions, the kind that make you wonder if someone's just pushing it. They were ready to quit when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Not just cooler, unnaturally cold, like all the heat had been pulled into the board itself. Then the planchette started moving on its own. The letters it spelled weren't in English. No one recognized them except for one person in the group. A friend who had studied Latin in college. He wasn't touching the board, but his face went pale as he realized what it was spelling. The words weren't random, they were sentences. Sentences that formed commands, threats. Everyone laughed it off, but that cold, sharp feeling in the air didn't fade. One of them suddenly yanked his hand away, startled. A bright red mark streaked across his wrist. Not deep enough to bleed, but raw, as if something had burned him just beneath the skin. The others looked on in silence. They were done for the night. The board was shoved back into its box. The candles were blown out, but whatever they had invited didn't seem to leave with it. For the next few days, everything felt off. Lights flickered without cause. Small objects fell over on their own. The one who'd been marked couldn't sleep. He said it felt like something was standing beside his bed every night. He started covering his wrist with a bandage, saying the mark still burned. His girlfriend, though, was the one who changed the most. She began waking up with bruises on her legs, round, faintly patterned, like someone had gripped her hard in the middle of the night. She stopped going out, stopped answering calls. And when anyone did see her, she looked distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. The others tried to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't connected to that night, but none of them could shake the memory of that board spelling in a language no one had spoken aloud, and none of them could explain how that scratch appeared when no one had touched him. A few weeks later, the friend who knew Latin finally opened up about what he'd read that night. The message wasn't a greeting or a name. It was a warning, one that began as an invitation and ended as a claim. It had said, roughly translated, "The body is mine." After that, they burned the board. But burning wood doesn't erase what was written on it, and for years after, every one of them swore they could still hear scratching, faint, rhythmic, coming from the walls on quiet nights. No one in that group has touched a Ouija board since, and the one with the scar on his wrist still covers it to this day. It started in a basement. 4 people, 2 brothers, their dad, and a close friend, sitting around a table late one night with an old Ouija board. The kind passed down, edges yellowed with age, the letters almost faded from years of use. The air was still, quiet, except for the hum of the basement lights. Before they began, they decided to move a porcelain doll that had always sat on one of the shelves. It had glass eyes, cracked at the edges, and a smile that looked more like a grimace when you stared too long. It made them uncomfortable, so they took it out of the room and laid it face down on a pile of towels in the next one. Just a precaution. At first, the board didn't do much. The planchette slid lazily, spelling nonsense, giving answers that didn't make sense. It was enough to keep them curious, but not enough to take seriously. One of the brothers eventually stepped away to use the bathroom, leaving the others to keep playing. That's when things changed. They asked a question, something simple, about the room next door, the one where the doll was. The planchette began to move faster, smoother, like the board had suddenly come alive. The letters didn't form a word. They were numbers. At first, they thought it was random, until they realized what those numbers were. It was a social security number, and not just anyone's. It belonged to the brother who had just walked out of the room. From that moment, the tone shifted. The candles seemed to flicker lower, shadows stretching along the walls. Whatever they were talking to was no longer pretending to be harmless. The questions became less of a game and more like a negotiation, trying to figure out what they had brought through. Then the board spelled another word, one that made everyone in the room stop breathing for a second. It slowly slid to each letter to spell out the word, doll. No more nonsense, no riddles, just that single word. The temperature dropped. They felt it immediately. The kind of chill that doesn't come from air conditioning or an open window. Something had moved. They all turned toward the doorway to the next room, the one where the doll had been placed face down. The silence stretched on for too long before anyone had the nerve to check. When they finally opened the door, the doll wasn't on the floor anymore. It was standing upright, positioned perfectly in front of the doorway. Its head tilted slightly upward, glass eyes staring straight into theirs. The towels it had been resting on were still there, untouched. The air around it felt charged, like static, like the moment right before lightning hits. That was enough. They ran. The board was thrown into a fire that same night, its surface blackening and curling until the letters disappeared. But destruction doesn't erase what's been summoned. The friend who burned it reportedly began to unravel afterward. Sleepless nights, paranoia, and long stretches of time he couldn't account for. He claimed he still saw the doll in his dreams, standing in corners, always in the same pose. And as for the cousin, the one whose number appeared on the board, he joined the Air Force not long after. It seemed random, maybe even unrelated. But when his family asked why, he never really gave an answer, only that he wanted to get far away from home, far away from the basement, and far away from the doll that wasn't supposed to move. It started as a joke, a harmless teenage moment. Curiosity mixed with boredom and just enough arrogance to push something best left alone. A friend of mine owned an old Ouija board, one she kept tucked away because she swore it made her uncomfortable. When I asked to see it, she hesitated, but eventually agreed. She set it up carefully, almost reluctantly, while I sat across from her, pretending not to take it seriously. The board itself looked ordinary. Smooth, worn edges, the letters slightly faded. The planchette rested still in the center. I waited for something to happen, half expecting nothing at all. For a long moment, the only sounds were the faint creaks of the house and the soft hiss of the candle flame beside us. When nothing moved, impatience took over. I mocked the silence, made a joke under my breath, something that came out sharper than I meant, and then everything stopped feeling normal. The air felt heavier, colder, as if the room itself was holding its breath. My friend immediately closed the session and packed the board away. Neither of us said much afterward, but the energy in that room lingered, like static before lightning. A week passed before anything happened. That night, I fell asleep on the couch upstairs. Outside, a storm had rolled in. Rain hitting the windows, wind pushing against the siding, thunder rumbling low in the distance. It was the kind of night that made the world feel closed in. I woke up suddenly. No reason, no sound or movement, just that deep, instinctual feeling that something wasn't right. The room was dark, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. For a few seconds, I lay still, listening. Then, through the noise of the storm, I heard it. A voice, low, strained, distorted. It came from downstairs, impossible to make out at first, but it carried a tone that made every muscle in my body tighten. I told myself it was just the wind, or the pipes, or my imagination trying to fill the silence. And then it came again, louder this time, angrier. The sound carried weight, not like a person shouting, but like something old and hollow forcing its way through air that didn't want it there. Before I could even move, a door downstairs slammed shut, not a soft click, a full, violent slam that shook the house. No one slept downstairs. There were no open windows, and that door never closed right. It always needed to be pulled hard to latch, but that night, it slammed with enough force to make dust fall from the ceiling. When morning finally came, I went downstairs. The air still felt strange, heavy and cold despite the heater running. The back door was standing wide open, rainwater pooled across the tile. But that wasn't what stopped me in my tracks. Muddy footprints trailed from the threshold halfway into the kitchen. They weren't ours, and they didn't lead out. They led in. The prints ended abruptly, facing the stairs that led up to where I had been sleeping. Almost like someone, or something, had stood there, listening. I never touched a Ouija board again. Because sometimes, when you mock something you don't understand, it doesn't just hear you, it remembers you. Some people think the Ouija board is just a toy, something you can laugh about when the night's over and the lights come back on. But stories like these always end the same way, with something that followed them home. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe it's imagination, or maybe some things are better left unanswered.